Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining me for the Ask an Editor live event. I'm Alison Wearing. I'm a writer and performer and the facilitator of Memoir Writing Inc., which is an online writing program, as well as the administrator of the Amy Award, which is an annual memoir writing contest for works of short memoir. So this event I normally offer it at the beginning of the Amy Award submission period so that people have a chance to apply these insights to their work and so on. But I was quite ill this winter and a lot of things got postponed. So I'm sorry this is coming to you late. And I know that some of you have already submitted your work and that must be frustrating. So I apologize. But I thought better late than never, because we do get 95% of the submissions coming in the last 48 hours before the deadline. It's just the nature of writers. I think we're just a bit like that. So I'm hoping that this will still be helpful to a lot of people. So now, full disclosure, I actually forgot to record the live event. Well, I forgot to record the first 20 minutes. So I'm recording this subsequently and I'm going to tack it on. And then at the 20-minute mark, someone said to me, "Are you recording this?" And I realized, no, I'm not. So so you'll get the bulk. We went on for a long time. The event went an hour and 35 minutes, I think. So it's just this first little rambly bit that I'm doing again. And basically all I said was, it was almost a disclaimer about just the nature of contests. I mean, it's a bit ironic, but I run a contest and I don't fully believe in it. I mean, I don't fully believe in the rankability of art. In other words, I don't believe that there is a winner and a loser and, a first place, second place, because it's so subjective. And we all know this, but I think it's important to just state it again, that every judge will have a different shortlist. Every judge will pick, many judges pick different winners. And I've sat on juries before and wow, it's just, it's not a straightforward process at all. And the things that you think are the obvious candidates for some just aren't. And so, right away, I just want to say, if you do submit a story and you don't make it to the long list, please don't take that as any reflection of who you are as a writer and what your capacities are. I try as well as I can to make it an even playing field, to get stories read by multiple people so that we can get a lot of different opinions and with that, ideally give every story the best chance that it possibly can. But of course, stories fall through the cracks. Some people prefer a certain kind of writing over another. There's just there's only so much we can do when there are humans in the room. I mean, I'd rather humans than AI, but we are a tricky bunch. So I just wanted to say that off the top. Okay, and the other thing I talked about was just the method that we use at the Amy Award. I think it's just helpful if I'm just totally transparent about that. We have a team of about a dozen first readers. The first readers, so when you send a story to us, it gets sent to two different readers. And those readers give it either a yes, meaning this is a potential winner, or a no, this is not a winner. Some stories get two yeses and they're just automatically on the long list. But that happens in very, very few cases, interestingly. Most stories that get a yes also get a no. And I find that very interesting. And I find it so interesting that I feel that story that got one yes and one no should get sent out to a third reader, so we get a third opinion. And if that third reader gives it a second yes, then that story also goes onto the long list. And every year that we've done this, we've had about 30 stories end up on the long list. It's just a coincidence. I don't know why it's always that number, but. And then those long listed stories get sent to the judge. And this year our judge is Kyo McClare. A brilliant writer, novelist, children's book author, memoirist. She's written one of my favorite memoirs, Bird's Art Life, and also Unearthing, which was last year's Governor General Award winner in the category of nonfiction. Brilliant book. She is our judge this year, so she will be reading the long listed stories only, those 30 stories. So I'm going to present to you Laurie Gough in a moment. She is the Memoir Writing Inc. She's our associate editor for that writing course I talked about that I run. And she's also a wonderful writer in her own right and a book editor and so on. She's got lots of experience and she's worked with a lot of people who submit stories to the Amy Award, and she's worked with a lot of people. I might be saying this later on. I can't remember what I ended up. Some of this might be repetition once you get the actual live stream, but she's worked with a lot of people who end up on the short list, and I think that's really interesting. People whose stories were good, and it just got them that extra little bit. And she's going to be talking to you about the kinds of things that she sees, the common errors she sees, and what you can consider doing to your story to give it its, to get it to its finest iteration and to give it its best possible chance in the contest or, in life. Okay, before I patch this into the recording of the real event, one thing that I did do in that 20 minutes that I didn't record was I found an interview that I did with Lorna Crozier, who was last year's judge of the Amy Award. I went to her garden in Victoria and we made the announcement together, and she chose a short list of 7 stories, and she chose a winner and a runner-up. And I found that recording, and it's her talking both about her experience of being a judge, what she looked for, what stood out for her, and then she talks about the winning story and why particularly she chose that story as the winner. She chose a winner and a runner-up, and the runner-up, interestingly, I would say, became our people's choice. I mean, the number of people who wrote in saying that they loved that story, everybody I think thought that was going to be the winner, and it was the runner-up. But so that alone is interesting. That alone just makes the point that I was alluding to earlier, that there's just no such thing as a winner and a best story. We're human, and we respond to things differently, and we all appreciate art in different ways, and that's why, a contest is kind of a silly venture, but we're doing it anyway. because a contest is great at giving you motivation. It has a deadline, a word count, and you can be motivated to do that hard work of revising and polishing that you need to do to get a piece to a publishable state. So it's a great exercise. I might also say that later. I can't remember. Okay, so I'm going to now patch in. I've edited our little conversation to about 5 minutes. So right now you're just going to see a very poor quality, unfortunately. Poor quality video, but great audio, and she says a lot of interesting things. So this is last year's judge talking about her experience of judging work, and then her comments on the winning story. Okay, and then after that interview, I'll patch you right into the live event, because that's when I remembered to press record. Okay, I hope that sufficed. Thank you so much.
To be a judge is often a very uncomfortable thing to be, because all of the stories had their own intrinsic value. They were all great. They were all at a publishable level. So then you have to look at them and try to be objective and say, now, why do I think one is better than the other? What I was looking for was warmth, was the personality of the writer shining through, as it had in Amy's essay that Alison just mentioned, the one that was shortlisted for the CBC competition. You really felt the woman behind the words. And that's not easy to do, even in creative nonfiction. Mm-hmm. You can develop a cool tone, a distance. Mm-hmm. You can end up hiding yourself, which I don't think is the purpose of either poetry or creative nonfiction. So I wanted the personality to shine through. I wanted it to be a story that intrigued me, that made me want to keep reading from paragraph to paragraph. The old, what's going to happen next? I wanted there to be characters who I thought were significant, not only in the life of the writer, the one who was experiencing something with this other person or with themselves, but significant in terms of what do they mean to culture as a whole, to the kinds of things that we go through just because we're born human in this world. The kind of connection that I wanted to get, where I said as a reader, wow, this essay makes me feel valued as a human being, makes me feel seen as a human being, and makes me feel less alone. That's what I want good writing to do. So going through these 33, they all did that in one way or another. But the two that floated to the top for me, like cream to the top of a milk bottle, Probably some of you haven't even seen cream floating to the top of a milk bottle. I know your mom and I have, but not everyone else would have. But anyway, to keep that metaphor going, the ones that floated to the top for me had everything I've said in abundance. And they're publishable pieces. You know, they should be out in the world. Other people should be reading them. And I have to say, I just think this is the neatest award. I don't always agree to judge competitions because I'm kind of anti-competition in a way. I wish everything didn't have to be first place, second place, third place. But this comes from such a hard place for you. And knowing that this wonderful woman, this wonderful writer died so young, but when she was having a success with her writing. And I remember reading that meant so much to her, even when she knew she wasn't going to be around a long time. One of her greatest accomplishments was getting that story placed in the CBC competition. And it just reminds you again of how you've got to get your work out there. You've got to believe in yourself, and it can bring you such pleasure.
You said you actually went for a walk in your garden when you were trying to decide.
That's right. I did. I read them all. I put, maybe 7 aside, and then I thought, how am I going to do this? And I did. I went for a walk in the garden, and just getting out into a world of beauty and nature always does something to my brain, and I think brings out the intuitive part of myself, not just the intellectual, so that I can hopefully be led to finding, the one that is doing all those things I mentioned earlier, and then some. I have to say about that essay, the American poet Robert Hass said, all the old poems are about loss, all the new ones too. And this essay very much is about loss. It's about the narrator's father falling into dementia and her relationship with him. And it's an old story. All the stories we tell are old stories, but how do you tell it in a way that is engaging and makes someone want to read it and be there with the writer? And the way that she did it was, again, I mentioned warmth earlier, the warmth of the narrator. I loved the woman who wrote this essay, and I fell in love with the father. And in spite of it being a very emotionally laden, sad story, it still had humor in it because the father had such a great sense of humor, and he was still exercising that part of himself, even as we knew he was diminishing. Yeah, it's a big-hearted story. It's very smart, very compelling, and I really encourage you to keep on writing and write more. Get those other stories out there.
So Kathy Cameron's The Road Elsewhere was the winner last year, but and that story and the runner-up story, both are available on my website, AlisonWearing.com. But I have to apologize because yesterday or the day before yesterday, I went to reread Kathy Cameron's story, and it was absolutely riddled with punctuation errors. And it has to have, it was not the final version. In other words, it was, Kathy sent me a version. She wanted to make there was a spelling error in the original version that was uploaded, and she sent me a correction, which I just uploaded without reading. But she must have sent me the wrong version, because this one is just a disaster of punctuation errors. And I was reading it through in horror, thinking, we're doing this event to tell people what to watch for. And somehow we have an early draft of this story up as the glittering example of memoir writing. So if anyone was wondering, if anyone was a bit confused about that, I don't know I don't know what happened. I thought that I had uploaded the most recent version, but, and perhaps Kathy sent me the wrong version. Anyway, now you can find the corrected version of that story, or the edited version of that story, which would have been the one that Lorna read. So that's important, because everything that Laurie's going to talk about wouldn't have made any sense if that was the version of the story you read. So that's really critical. Okay, I'm going to bring, I've mentioned her name now 60 times, and now I'm going to bring her on. So Laurie Gough, as I mentioned, is a writer and editor. She has worked with, she's the associate editor of Memoir Writing Inc., meaning that she is an editor that our students and graduates have access to, if they're submitting work to a contest or something, they can submit it to Laurie and get hi, Laurie.
Hi. So as Alison mentioned, I've been the associate editor for Alison's program for a few years now, and for the Amy Awards, this service is open to everyone who is submitting a story and wants to get have a second eye on your piece of writing. And for the past 3 years, when the long and short lists have come out, those listed stories, as Alison mentioned, have looked very familiar to me because I worked with that writer on many of those writers, not all of them. Actually, not those two that we're talking about now, the winner and runner-up, but many in all the 3 years, those long listed
I think you
stories.
did work with the runner-up last year.
Oh, yes, you're right. I did. Okay. So they were stories written by people who had taken the extra step of having them professionally edited, and it paid off for them. So these stories were all well written for the most part before they were submitted to me, but in every case I did find something, or many times a few things, not just the odd punctuation error, but a word that sounded clunky, or a sentence that was too long and would have been better in 2 short sentences, or a cliche, or I'd realized the story was stronger without a certain paragraph or a certain sentence that might have over explained something. Or I'd suggest that instead of explaining something, to instead write a short scene to illustrate the same thing, which would make the whole piece more powerful. So after all of that and those suggestions and back and forths and all my comments and track changes, the writer would work on the story some more and send it back to me for a final edit. It's a 2-step process. And mainly it's because we don't see our own writing very well. We definitely don't usually see our mistakes. Our minds fill in that missing word or those punctuation errors. And if you've worked on a piece of writing a lot, as you should, of course, you actually can't be objective about it anymore. It's really hard to see our own writing. So you need that fresh set of eyes. And I was at a writers' conference once where Margaret Atwood gave a talk, and she told the audience that she never sends anything out into the world without first sending it to this woman in England, this private editor who Margaret Atwood has trusted for over 40 years. And this woman was an independent editor, and she sends everything to her before she sends her work off to her publisher. And of course, the publisher also has its own editors. And I was shocked. I think the whole audience was really, wow, even Margaret Atwood does that. So it just goes to show that everyone can benefit from an editor. So I have identified the 5 most common issues that I come across regularly when I edit these Amy Award stories. So I'd like to go through them. The first one is the longest, but it's the most important. So show, don't tell. This is the #1 rule of writing. You've all heard this over and over, I'm sure, in Alison's course, but it's amazing how often I get something and it's almost all telling. And it takes practice to learn to show rather than tell. Writing is hard work. And also, of course, you can't show all the time. There are times when you really just have to go ahead and explain something, or your story would never end. So, show don't tell is a writing technique where the story and characters are related through sensory details and actions rather than exposition. And it fosters a much more immersive experience for the reader, fully engaging them, allowing them to be in the room with the characters rather than being left on the outside. So, when you tell rather than show, you inform readers just mere information rather than allowing them to deduce anything or feel anything for themselves. But showing paints a picture in the reader's mind's eye. So for an example, I have a few examples. Telling, my brother's room smelled bad. Showing, my brother's room smelled like a combination of uncleaned hamster cage and nacho cheese. The overarching fog of Axe body spray hung over the mess like a sickly sweet poison cloud, but that gas was no match for my brother's own, and the toxic combo made me gasp for fresh air. And this is a shorter one. Instead of writing Ted is mad, show how Ted is mad. Ted stormed into the living room and threw a wet sock at his cousin Cindy, telling he was generous, confident, and likable, but showing that same thing. He threw $5 down for the cup of coffee, winked at the waiter, and walked out, his arms swinging. So another one, notice the difference between these two sentences. The woman drove her car into town, and this one, Helena drove her Pontiac Firebird to Vegas. So those small details make all the difference to a story. You can show how you feel by describing what's happening physically in your own body. So instead of saying you're nervous, which is telling, what is happening to your stomach, to your nerve endings, your heart rate, your pulse? Are you breaking out in a sweat? What panicky thoughts are ricocheting around in your head? Are you feeling paranoid? Instead of telling us you're feeling paranoid, describe who you think is staring at you or following you. You can also show how you feel by describing the setting around you. Rather than saying, I felt lonely, you can describe your surroundings seeming lonely to you. Maybe a street full of unsmiling people staring blankly ahead, or an amusement park where everyone is holding hands with someone. You get across the feeling of a narrator's loneliness without coming out and saying, I'm lonely, I feel lonely. And showing is about using concrete details. So when you write with details, it makes your writing jump off the page. And you'll notice this when you read that story that we were just talking about, that Sophie wrote. The more specific you are in your details, the more the readers can visualize it. Instead of being general and vague, be specific. So don't say fruit, say pomegranate or rotting mangoes, or what kind of tree was in your front yard when you were a kid? What was the shape of that woman's hat when she sold you that book in Istanbul? Readers need a vivid picture in their minds. Adverbs and adjectives too weaken writing because they're not specific. I mean, it's okay to have some adjectives. Obviously, you need adjectives once in a while, but a strong verb is usually better. So, an example of sort of a weak adjective or adverb is she dressed beautifully. But what does that mean? Or the mountainside was beautiful, or the city was incredible. Those are all weak sentences. You have to describe people and places in your own words, not using general, overused adjectives or cliches, but real, concrete, original sensory detail. So if your character is tall, your reader can deduce that because you mention others looking up when they talk to him, or he has to duck down through a door, or when posing for a picture, he has to bend his knees to keep his head in proximity with others. Instead of saying she was cold, don't say that. Show us. She pulls her collar up, or she tightens her scarf, or she shoves her hands deep in her pockets. When you show rather than tell, you make the readers part of the experience. So rather than having simply everything imparted to us, we see it in our mind and we come to the conclusions that you want them to come to. So, what better way of engaging readers, giving them an active role in the story experience? Okay. I feel like I could talk forever about show don't tell, and I have so many examples in my head and written down just because I see this so often when I'm editing people's writing. And sometimes when I'm editing, I see that someone is only telling. And so what I'll do is I'll write a scene as an example to show how all that telling could be brought to life in a scene. And it's so fun to write in scenes, especially using dialogue. So I just encourage you to look over all of your writing and make sure to see, could I show this instead of telling this? Because by showing, you allow the reader inside so they have an experience and they get to feel something. And think about how powerful that is. Number two,
Sorry, just to end number one. I'm just remembering that after one of the year's one of the first round readings,
Mhm.
I just polled the readers and asked them what was, if you could give me one sentence of what was it about the stories that got a yes versus a no.
Mhm.
They all said this. They all said versions of this. They didn't use that language necessarily, but one person I remember saying, everything sounded like a TED talk, except this, these two stories that I gave yeses to, because they were actual stories. Now, what she meant by that was that this person was telling them about this thing, as though it were I mean, there's nothing wrong with TED Talks, but it's not memoir. And it's not that that you can't have some. I mean, it's called storytelling for a reason. We do tell sometimes, as you mentioned, but it was interesting. Every single reader said the same thing. That was the one, if they had to narrow it down to one single defining characteristic of the stories that moved on, that was it. Okay, so that's why I put number 1, show, don't tell. Okay, sorry to interrupt.
Okay, no problem. Yeah, that's really interesting. Okay, number 2, I'm going to call it So What? This Isn't a Story. Sometimes sometimes someone will have a really good story, but there's no self-reflection, there's no contemplation. Memoir isn't just about recording events of what happened back at a certain time in your life. It's also about how you now look back at that time. So how you're making sense of it. It has to mean something. It has to have a narrative arc. It has to be multi-layered. And the story called The Almost Dad by Sophie Cohn, that is very multi-layered. Maybe we can talk about that. There's so many different layers, and she digs deep and brings things out and holds it out for us so we can all see it. So sometimes someone might have a great story, but I think this is really just an anecdote. So if you're stuck trying to figure out how to deepen your story, if something really incredible has happened to you, think, what was going on with me at the time? What were you trying to work out at that time in your life? Was there a struggle? Was there a quest at that time? A memoir or a personal essay can be richer when there's a quest involved. Not that every memoir story has to have a quest. It's just one technique that I find always is very intriguing and captivating. It's not just an external quest, but an internal one, something you were looking to change within yourself to get over a divorce or a death or a car accident, or to find your younger, more free-spirited self, for example. So when critiquing your own stories, ask, so what? Why should the reader care about this? What's in it for the reader? What does it mean? How can what happened to me radiate out into the world? So for example, this is something that I came across in the New York Times comment section, that this was nothing to do with writing, but I thought this was so interesting that this guy had this story that on the outside, it was just a surface story, that he got a puppy from a family. He adopted a puppy, and 6 months later he went to the beach with this puppy, and he happened to run into the people that he adopted the puppy from, and they were with the puppy's mother. So his puppy and the puppy's mother went towards each other. They sniffed each other. They spent 3 seconds together, and then they went off in their own way. So what? Big deal. That's just an anecdote. But for the guy that this happened to, there's another whole layer underneath, that he realized in that moment that he could be free of family ties, because apparently he had a very abusive brother, and he thought, I can let my abusive brother go. if my puppy doesn't even care about seeing its own mother and just going off happily into the world, sniffing other dogs or whatever it's doing. And it was just very freeing. It's a freeing moment. So just reading that made me realize that's the underlying layer. The layer beneath the surface story lends the story its universal resonance. It grabs the reader's hand, saying, here's something not just that I went through, that we've all been through. Layers make the reader care. So so that's something to keep in mind. Is there another layer? What was going on with me? I had another one. A woman wrote about a car accident she was in, and it was well written, step by step, about this car accident. A lot of details, which was great. It was showing, not telling, but still it didn't have another layer. It was just the story of this car accident. So when I asked her about this, she mentioned that her marriage was falling apart at the time of this accident. And I suggested she try putting those two things together, the story of her marriage falling apart along with the accident. And when she tried that, suddenly her story had that missing layer, and it was so much richer. So that's what layering is about when we talk about layering. So next, number 3, critical moments. So word count dictates pacing. If you want your reader to pay attention to a moment, write more about it, more description, more details, more internal processing. Make the reader sit in those moments. So, for example, the car crash, spin the car crash out over multiple paragraphs because that's how car crashes feel. If you're writing up about a birth, your own birth or someone else's birth, and it's central to the story, spin that out in detail. The groaning, the pain, the look on the midwife's face or the nurse's face or whoever, and the quiet, the weird silence, and then the sudden noise that fills the air when the baby is first crying. There's research into the brain and reading, all kinds of really interesting research. And they say that readers just read along, relying on short-term memory. You're not necessarily going to remember the book very well after you finish it or the story. But if we can create a scene complex enough, the reader has to discover how they feel about it. And that requires working memory. So if the reader is engaged long enough in the scene, it has a good chance of making it into someone's long-term memory. The scene has to be full of details, of course, and it has to be something unexpected too, which really triggers something. Because when we feel something as readers, we're not feeling what the character is feeling only. We're drawing from our own long-term memory and reliving a feeling that we ourselves have experienced. Okay, next one is this 4. 4, punctuation. And it's so much easier when I get something, if I don't have to spend time correcting people's punctuation and grammar and run-on sentences, paragraph issues. When all of that clutter isn't there, I can actually see the writing so much better and see what needs to be done to help craft the story and improve it. But if a writing is full of errors, that's all I see. I just see the errors. So sometimes I actually just send it right back and I say, please correct your punctuation, because I'm not in this to do copy editing. That's so tedious for me. I really, really don't like doing that. I mean, I don't mind 1 or 2 throughout. There's always a few. But if every sentence is just full of punctuation, I can't. I just have to send it back and say, I'm lost in the weeds. I want to see the beautiful, clear prose behind this. So please correct your errors first. So sometimes people wonder if they need to send something to an editor before submitting to a contest. And if you don't want to send it through this process through Alison, and then it gets over to me, transferred to me, at least get several people you know to look at it first, because as people who know punctuation and people who know grammar and people who are readers. And so just to get that second eye, it's really important, because once it's in a contest, Allison and I have both been readers and judges for contests. And we know that if we get something that has even 1 punctuation error, usually we just toss it aside because there's so many entries. And we think, well, why would we even keep reading this or allow this to be part of this thing if this person hasn't taken the time? Maybe 2 punctuation errors would be the allowable amount, but really it has to be clean of errors. So before you send it off, make sure it is. So common errors I see are run-on sentences or missing verbs, or not understanding the difference between IT' and ITS. It's and its. Pronoun errors such as he gave the present. Someone will say he gave the present to Susan and I. No, that's wrong. He gave the present to Susan and me. I know you hear this all the time. Now there's so many errors with pronouns, even on CBC radio. I hear this all the time, but it needs to be grammatically correct. Or a huge one I see, and this is kind of a pet peeve of mine, and it's also incorrect when people do this. When they're spelling mom and dad, if it's mom and dad, if there's a my in front of it, my mom, it's not capitalized. And it's only capitalized when mom and dad are being used as their names. Mom came over, or I saw mom yesterday. That would be capitalized. But if there's a my in front of it, no, it's not capitalized. And I see that mistake all the time. Sometimes sentences are just way too long and I get lost trying to figure out what's going on. So you need your writing to be clear. So short sentences are almost always preferable to long ones. Try breaking up a sentence into 2. Think, what am I really trying to say here? Is this clear? Okay, finally, Sticking to your container. I know Allison must talk about this, so I love the way she calls it a container, and I find that really useful. Sticking to your container and sticking to your theme and avoiding tangents and going off on rabbit trails that have nothing to do with your main story. This happens a lot. I see this a lot in these short stories for the Emmy Awards. Everything has to relate to and deepen your theme and be part of your container. It has to have a through line. Otherwise, it's extraneous. So a piece of writing needs momentum so the reader knows where we're going with it. So I find people often try to cover way too much in their stories. They go through decades of their lives in one paragraph. That's all telling, and that can't be done in scenes. It's not, and so it's not usually very interesting. So think small, look for small, self-contained incidents that convey a larger truth or a deeper meaning, that universal truth that your readers will recognize from their own life. Avoid cliches like the plague. Go through your work with your cliche meter set on high. Get rid of all cliches, unless they're used in dialogue, because that is showing something about the character. That's completely different. And of course, in dialogue, you can get away, you can do whatever you want. You can have the writer use all kinds of grammatical errors because they're speaking. So that's a completely different story. So overall, editors can give you that very important second eye, set of eyes, and mostly an editor will be honest with you, unlike your friends or your family or your mother, who will tell you that they love your work no matter what. Often I get somebody who submits something and they say, oh, my mother, all my friends just love the story. I don't think there's anything wrong. Just thought I'd send it to you. And I see a lot that needs to be worked on. So editors will be honest with you. I'm still gentle, but I'm honest. So editors use a critical eye to help you make the work the best it can be. I think that's all I have to say about that.
All right. Okay. Let me see. Okay, great. Thank you. There was a lot. Yeah, there's a lot that we do talk about in the course, and I think it's just helpful to be reminded. I mean, I also want to say, so some people have reading partners, and that's a great way of doing it. Or if you have a reading group, you can just offer, okay, let's all read each other's stories. You can, I mean, this is almost heresy, but you can run your story through something called Grammarly, just to, just as a basic, and a really, that's just like the lowest level standard, just to make sure it's sort of correct. The thing I don't like about Grammarly, I mean, there are many things, but I mean, one, I just, AI, I'm not a fan, but it also doesn't allow for certain styles, and it doesn't necessarily, just because it marks it wrong doesn't mean it can't be allowed. So it can get confusing. But I would say if you don't have any other single resource and you want just to have it maybe copy edited, you could just choose that as the lowest bar. But ideally you do have a friend or two to do this with, and you can, now that I was reminded to record, we do have this recording. I jotted down a few of the things. You will get the recording in the mail. And for those people who do want to so those people who are Memoir Writing Inc. students, if you go to your dashboard and you look at your bonus offerings course, in the bonus offerings, there is a thing that says, are you submitting your work to an or wanting to submit your work to an editor, something like that? And you will find the link to Laurie's page. But because this invitation went out to beyond the students and graduates of Memoir Writing Inc., sort of by accident, I don't want to leave you out. That feels a little bit, sort of stupidly exclusive. So I'm going to share with you the link to the page where you can also, if you are submitting to the Amy Award and you would like to go through Laurie, the one thing I will say is, there'll be don't wait. Well, what I suggested to Laurie was that she have a deadline, because it is a two-tiered system, a two-stage system rather. You send Laurie a piece, she gives you feedback, you can work on that feedback, resubmit it, and get it all tidied up so it's ready to submit. So it is 2 stages, so allow for time. And I think the first stage of that process, we decided the deadline for that is June 15th. So that gives you then 2 weeks to incorporate Laurie's, because she's going to have she has a lot of stories to work with. So she needs turnaround time, but she's amazingly quick. You're amazingly quick, Laurie. I don't know how you do it as you do, but
I get on a roll. I just do one
yeah.
up.
Yeah,
I wanted
it's astonishing actually. So let me
Okay.
just find the link.
Okay, well, you're looking for that. I wanted to say, you mentioned Grammarly, and I have not found, I mean, I don't have that myself. I don't know how it works, but I'm a book editor as well as doing this. Um, that's my main thing is I edit books for people, mostly memoir, but also fiction. And a lot of times people tell me they put the whole thing through Grammarly and I get it and it's still riddled with error. So I don't know what this Grammarly
Oh,
is.
okay.
It's
Yeah,
not, I don't know.
what I think it's good for is email. If you don't
Oh,
send your email with errors in it, it will
okay.
check. But I think, yes, you are able, sorry for the confusion. Normally, yeah, you are able to send, you can follow that link. Okay, so no, I can't unfortunately recommend a copy editor, but the other thing I want to recommend is a website called, no, ignore that. It's called readz.com. Readz.com, REE. I don't know why. I don't know where that name came from. But anyway, readz.com is this database of editors, and you could find easily a copy editor. I don't remember how much the cost is, Nina. It's all on, but the page that for Memoir Writing Inc. students, you'll find it in your bonus offerings. And I just posted the link here. I'll post it again. It's all there. I don't actually remember what the details are, and I'll send that link out with the recording. So if you can't see the chat or whatever, I will send it again. So
And then I'm also an editor on my own. If people have
Right.
something other, I mean, not the Amy Awards can go through you, but I am, they can just Google my name and whatever.
Yeah. So it's the hour now. So I think I want to just give people the opportunity. So this was basically the length I imagined. I never said an end game, but so if you would like to drop off now, I hope that you have found it helpful. The deadline, so the deadline to submit to Laurie, like to get that process started, would be June 15th. The deadline for the Amy Award is June 30th. And we do tend to get, all 95% of submissions within the last 48 hours, let's say, which is fine. I mean, there's no advantage to submitting early. If you want to just keep circulating it to friends and getting feedback, you can wait right till the end. There's no problem with that. I would love to, if you submit by June 30th, will it automatically be passed to Laurie? Yes, if she has space. I mean, that's the one thing. We'll just see how it goes. Yeah, I am sorry to be doing this so late. As I said at the beginning of this event, we normally do this. We normally do this event right when the Amy Award is announced, so there's lots of time, but I was very ill this winter and I just had to let a lot of things slide, and this unfortunately was one of the things that slid. So we're just getting to this now. I felt like there was still maybe time, and if nothing else, it just gives you a few things to watch for, so you can do you can submit your work in as good a shape as possible.
Could the Amy Award deadline be extended, or is that
No,
No,
not
okay.
really. No, because so this year's judge is Kyo McClare, who I'm so excited about. So Kyo is the author of one of my favorite memoirs called Birds, Art, Life, and another beautiful memoir called Unearthing. And so I have to follow her schedule. I've set that
Right.
up in advance, and all the readers, unfortunately the deadline can't be pushed. But so that brings us to the hour. But if you would like to stay on, I'm happy to look at the and I did say that people could submit their questions. Hang on a minute. That was the whole thing. Bring your questions, right? Okay, so let's give Laurie a chance to answer questions, and then if there's time, we'll go through the Almost Dad. So rather than putting your questions in the chat, which zips by at a mile an hour, if you could please put your questions in the Q&A box. If you hover over your screen, over the bottom of your Zoom screen, you will see a Q&A box. If you could put it there, then it's just, I can see them all. Okay, so I'm going to feed Laurie some questions. I have written a personal essay. It's got some comedy in it. Is comedy acceptable? I've read the stories so far, and they are all quite serious.
Oh my gosh, comedy. Yes, love it.
Yes,
Of
bring it
course.
on. Absolutely bring it on. No, we have had funny stories in the past. The two winners this year last year weren't funny. Although Sophie, who wrote The Almost Dad, the runner-up, she is going to lead a comedy workshop for our Writing Inc. grads. Yeah, in the fall. So yeah, that should be great. Okay. Does dialogue belong in a personal essay, such as
Yeah.
an entry to the Amy Award?
Yes, definitely.
Yes, I think the confusion there is the term essay, which from school we associate with a certain kind of writing. But a personal essay in this instance really is synonymous with a work of short memoir. And so it is, yeah, it can have as many scenes as possible. Should submissions be with American or English spelling?
Either one.
Yeah. Yeah, we have people submitting from all over the world. And so we don't make any distinctions there. Laurie, what is your preferred editing platform or app?
I use track changes. Is that what she means?
I guess so. Yeah. So a Word document, things need to be submitted in a Word doc.
Oh, yes, yes. Usually I get them from I get a notification and I go to Google
right.
Drive and then I put it into a Word doc and then use track changes. Yeah.
Okay. You mentioned Sophie's story. What is the name of that one? It's called The Almost Dad. And we are going to look at it if there's time. Yeah. I assume there's a cost to the Laurie review. Yes, but I don't remember it off the top of my head, but it will all be there in that link that I put in the chat. Okay, can dialogue be written in italics without quotation marks? Also, when dialogue is spoken by a non-English speaker, can what they say be written in not the best grammar?
Oh, yeah. That as I was saying, it's fine to have anything in dialogue because that's what they're saying. Yeah. Oh, I forgot to mention a lot of people don't use contractions, and it's natural speech to use contractions. We all use contractions all the time. So I think people of a certain age might have learned that in school years ago, never to use contractions. So even within the part that's not dialogue, go ahead and use contractions. As for the italics, that's I don't know. I mean, it's not wrong. It's not wrong. I would.
And I think that's stylistic. I mean,
That's right.
I sometimes love writing that doesn't use any quotation marks at all, and the dialogue's sort of just part of it.
Yeah, that's right. You see that more now. And
Yeah, you do.
yeah,
Yeah, and
the style.
I want to say though, a little word of warning that it's harder than it looks to pull that off.
It has
So
to be clear.
yeah, and so just not using quotation marks can be disastrous, but italics could easily. I mean, italics are often used also for self-reflection too.
That's true.
Okay, for the Amy Award, is it necessary for the story to deal with loss? No, what Lorna was talking about, so that's referring to the video of Lorna Crozier, the judge, talking about how, what did she say? The newest story, what was the quote from the poet? it was all something about how all stories deal with loss. That was
Mm.
just it was just an her example. The 2 winning stories last year did both deal with loss, but that was just coincidence. No, what's interesting about memoir is that it tends to be the stories that shape us in some way, the most profound stories, and those are often stories of loss, but no, not, they don't need to be by any means. Is paragraph length important to you?
Yeah, no. Well, sometimes things need to be broken up into more paragraphs. I don't know. That's I don't really know what she means. Do you?
No, I guess no, I mean, well, I think I know what she means, that, is it important to have basically standardized, but
Yes.
the answer is no. If it's the important thing is that it's intentional and clear. That paragraph's going to go on and on and on for 3 pages. There needs to be a reason for that.
Exactly.
The word count is 2,000 words. Do you know of native editors? What resources would be appropriate for me to look further? I would suggest Readsy, that website that I put in there. Yeah, that you will just find everything. I mean, it's this huge database of editors, and a really good one. And you can search on whatever you want, and you'll find, I think, what you're looking for. Okay, what is your recommendation on using foreign words? Do we need to write the meaning before the story, I think they mean.
A lot of times foreign words are in italics, and then we can usually sometimes figure out the meaning by the context. And if we can't, then it would need to be explained. You can't have a bunch of words that we don't know the meaning of.
But we can be creative. I mean, ideally, you're really creative in how, there are ways of, as Laurie said, ways of just sort of contextualizing the foreign word so that we can
Infer.
infer meaning. That's
Yeah.
ideal.
Yeah. I like that when there are foreign words, and it makes it interesting.
Yeah, there's a texture. I did hear recently that italicizing foreign words is now a no-no.
Oh, why is that?
It's a political correctness thing. I think I know.
If it's in another language.
I know. I find it a little bit, yeah. I just needed to say that because I've heard that, but I certainly don't feel, I don't feel that putting, so that we know that it's not a spelling error. If we put it in italics, then it's very clear. So
I think that seems crazy to me.
yeah, it does to me too. Okay,
Okay.
thanks. Okay. Is it okay to use a sentence fragment for emphasis or pacing?
Yes, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Silly question, but when you say double spaced, how many spaces are between paragraphs? I don't know the answer to that, other than if you have your document in Word and you select all and then you select double space, it will do it for you. But do you have a better answer than that, Laurie?
No, that's right. It's not, you don't put an extra space in between paragraphs. It's just the next line, but it's indented. Oh, actually, there are 2 different ways. If you can either indent and then you don't have a space in between, you just have the normal space in between, or you can have a space but you don't indent. Do you know what I mean? There are 2 different ways that people do it, and they're both okay.
But when there's a space between each line, I guess there are 2 spaces between. Oh, I don't.
Well, there are 2 spaces if you don't indent.
Okay. Thank you. I wonder if submitting last minute just before the deadline is a disadvantage. No, as I said, no disadvantage at all. I mean, in some ways, you then have time to have a revelation.
That's great.
Okay. Okay. how do we get our Amy stories to Laurie for feedback before? Okay, so that we've done that. My piece is on the short side, 900 words. I've been told that it makes the reader want more. Do you think I should try to expand or leave the writer wanting more?
Oh, we have had short stories in the past. That one called The Parking Lot from the first year was very short, but it was so good. It
So good.
didn't matter that it was short. It said everything it needed to say. If you can find that, would that be on your website, do you think? Or
Not, it's in the first Amy Award anthology, which you can get
okay.
a print version or as an ebook, so you can access it really easily. Yay,
Okay.
The Parking Lot by Gail Purdy. Yes, that was a beautiful
Yes. So
story.
good.
It was so short. So yeah, by all means, don't feel you need to stretch it out. 2,000 words is just the maximum. So
Exactly.
yeah. Okay, can I use a small section of a book I'm working on and alter and submit it as an essay?
If it's a standalone, if it works as a standalone, then yes, people have done that before, and it can't, it has to be work on its own, is what I mean. Yeah,
Yeah, so there needs to be an arc where there can't be things that we need to be informed about or
from other chapters or whatever. Yeah.
um do you oh okay. Yeah, italics more for internal thought. Maybe this is cringeworthy. I've always written with ellipses. Ellipses, I guess they are the plural. They've become almost part of my style, giving space. Do I need to get rid of this habit?
I don't think it adds anything to do that.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think?
I mean, anything that's overdone is overdone.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
and when we overdo it, it loses its impact.
That's
So,
right.
yeah, I would agree that it probably doesn't add. Can the form of playwriting be used for creative nonfiction? We've never had a submission that is a play. I mean, these are Amy Award questions specifically. I mean, a play. The thing that I love about theater is the moment it's theater, you can do anything. You're not bound by the conventions of creative nonfiction. In other words, you can base a piece of theater on a true story, and no one asks, "Is this true? Is that true? Is this true? Is that true?" It is assumed, I think, maybe by even just the word play, that you are playing with a story. So I've never seen a play be categorized as creative nonfiction, and we've never had a submission, I don't think, to the Amy Award that's been in the form of a play. But I do autobiographical one-woman shows, and they're autobiographical, but they're not memoir. Okay. Can dialogue between persons going back and forth be slightly indented? Might that be a stylistic thing?
Oh, they should be indented, not slightly, just the standard 5 spaces or whatever it is on the tab. Um, yeah, and every new speaker, it has to be a new paragraph.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because dialogue, the formatting of dialogue is so important for dialogue to work. And a lot of people don't just sort of make up their own formatting and assume that we're going to get it. And this is not about being sticklers for convention. I am all for the unconventional, but there needs to be a reason, and it needs to be consistent. And for example, leaving out the quotation marks, that's more difficult. I mean, the thing about conventions is that it's like a shorthand of understanding for us, the reader. As soon as we see that indent and a new line on each page, a new line for each speaker, we immediately know that the speaker is changing without needing to say, then Dave said, then I said, then Dave said, then I said. The moment we give it. And so I would say in that case, what was your answer? Can dialogue first? Oh, yes, be slightly indented. No, they must be indented. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any flexibility with word count, or if you're a couple of words over? No, it is 2,000 words max. So if you're over, it's disqualified.
And it's kind of fun to try it if, you know, if you're 5 words extra, it's kind of fun to look through, oh, well, I can get rid of this word, I can get rid of this word. And it's like a puzzle, as I was saying. It usually makes it better by getting rid of all those extra little words.
I agree. It's a creative challenge that will probably make the work stronger. Yeah.
Yeah.
So a Mac computer uses Pages. Does that work or convert to Word? No, do not submit something in Pages. Pages is this bizarre Mac. I have not been able to convert it to Word. Have you, Laurie?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, but Macs also have a Word program. So if you can just put it into Mac Word, then you've solved your issue right there.
Okay.
Can I use a verse from a children's song or poem that has been from a memory and citing it from memory?
Yep.
Yeah, okay, that was easy. Should a paragraph be like a mini container about one topic?
A mini container. It's a building block of the whole So
Yeah.
that sounds like when we were in high school and built the essays, each essay had to be something specific. So this is different.
Yeah.
This is a story. So
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, yeah, I think so much of it can be intuitive in that sense. No, there's something it's sort of like a breath in conversation, or can be. I think I think the more reading we do, I mean, yeah, the more reading we do, the more natural it becomes. So you're probably doing it
yes,
quite naturally already.
that's right.
Please help me understand what essay is meaning in today's conversation. Is it the same as narrative?
That's sort of what you were talking about before when you said there's a lot of confusion with the word essay because we think of it as high school essays or university essays, but essay and memoir are the same, and narrative. These are
Yeah,
stories.
yeah. I wish there were
Narr-
just one category that just said stories. That to me is just,
Yeah, that's right.
I use dashes. Is that okay?
Dashes. I guess it depends how they're used. How often or when or why.
Yeah, yeah.
There's something
Dashes
wrong
used
with them.
correctly are great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so if it's standalone from a book I'm working on and would like to publish, but if it was published with you, am I able to still publish it in my book? We do not hold publication rights. So even if you won the story, we're not publishing an anthology next year. We might, as I said earlier, do a 5-year anthology, but at that point, we would be seeking the publication rights from you or from the publication that it ended up in. So you don't lose any access to publication rights by submitting to the contest at all. On the contrary, if your story placed or was, or won, it would be very attractive to a publisher. And likewise, if your story wins, you then can approach a literary journal or magazine of your choice and say, the story just won. Would you like to publish it? They will be more interested in it. So you don't lose anything. Okay. If I submit my writing under a pen name, you will not know that I joyously completed Memoir Inc. Would I still have a chance if I seem like an outsider? Okay. We don't see the names of any of the submissions. We see the title of the submission only. So your name gets logged at the back end of and I don't have anything to do. I am not a reader. I'm not a judge. I'm just the administrator behind the scenes. So, but I don't I'm not even looking at that point. When we announce the long list, that's when we go behind the scenes and put titles and names together. But until then, the readers are just getting a title and a story. And that's why if your name appears on your story, you're disqualified, because the whole point of it is that it's a blind jury. And I should just also be very clear that Laurie, we have a spreadsheet of all the stories that Laurie has worked on. So when she was a reader for the contest, she wasn't given the stories that she worked on. We made sure those stories went to other readers. So just so, we just try to make it as fair and blind as possible. So, okay. Okay, there's a lot of stuff on dialogue, questions about italics and indented. I mean, I want to show, I think now, let's just see if there are any other, there are quite a number of questions. We're not going to get to all of them, but should we use foot or endnotes for facts that we may be inserting? For example, if we use lyrics from a song, you don't need, I mean, generally, no. And in a situation like this, if the only reason you would need to footnote something is, you know, if it were to be published later on, for this purpose, you just don't need to worry about any of that. Okay. Okay, one more. Some of my stories are written in the third person and the narrator has a different name as if it were fiction, but it is creative nonfiction memoir. Does that matter? No. In other words, you're disguising yourself in the story and it's written in the third person.
Written in the third person. Most of these are written in the first person because
They are, but
say.
occasionally we've had third person. I mean, it can, yeah, I don't see any issue.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
no, right, the vast majority are first person. Okay, so I just want to you know, we're way over time here, but I do just want to bring up Sophie's story because there's also a punctuation thing that will help people, because in her case, this is how she did. The punctuation is not actually indented in her case. And she
That's
just
because she skipped a line. So that's
right.
what I was talking about.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
fine.
Exactly. So when it's spaced like this, I mean, there's a lot. What I want to say is don't worry too much about formatting is not going to get your story disqualified if it's formatted slightly differently. Following convention as closely as possible is a great way to ensure that you're staying within the guidelines. But this, yeah, this is, in some ways, this it's just a magnificent story. Like if you want to study a story that gets it all right, I mean, you can just read it 5 times. You'll see something different each time.
I agree. So beautiful.
It's so beautiful. It's so beautiful. And Laurie talked about these layers. I mean, I'm just gonna, why don't we go through it quickly? I'm just gonna point out a few of the things that I see and appreciate. And then Laurie, I'll turn it over to you to do the same. Do you want to do that, or do you want to do it?
Sure. That sounds good.
I mean, I just love, I love the simplicity, these clear, simple sentences. Now, this is a comment on style. This isn't everyone's style. And, you know, this wasn't Lorna's choice for winner. It was Lorna's choice for runner up, but it would have been another judge's choice for winner and Kathy's runner up. I mean, it's just that as I said at the beginning, there is such subjectivity in contests, in all judging, in all readers, in all art. And that's part of this process. So I'm just going to go through and look at and show you what I love about it. I mean, just talking about Laurie's thing about the sensory detail, you know, as soon as she's 16, Arthur is sitting in his red Honda parked outside the school, not red car, red Honda parked outside the school. The thin glass windows barely contain his full volume Verdi. As soon as I step outside, the lilt of his muffled underwater opera alerts me to his whereabouts. I mean, I don't know about you, but I am stepping outside that school and that sound of a car that's where the door is closed, but the opera's blaring. I'd never heard it as muffled underwater opera, but that's exactly what it sounds like. And that's the first time she drops music. She drops music all the way through the piece. And each time she does, the music has a slightly different meaning. That's one layer. There are so many layers to this piece. That is one. I love this line. I smirk with the affected skepticism of every teenage girl in a kilt. Secretly, I feel safe. So we know she's in private school because she's a teenage girl in a kilt. At least in Canada, we know she's a private school girl because that's what private school, well, that's what I can place her without her saying that, but I have a sense of her. I can just feel so much of her character coming through in those two short sentences. This guy that she's writing about, the almost dad, he pops by on an unremarkable Sunday with a pot of clambering ivy for our empty kitchen windowsill. The story starts with an empty kitchen windowsill and him bringing this little pot of ivy. She refers later to this, the ivy comes back and it has grown. It becomes symbolic both of the emptiness of the house beforehand and the life that he brings to it. Without her saying, my house was empty before he arrived. Then he bought a plant, which brought life to our place. She doesn't, never tells, shows. There are so many places, like the ivory shows up again. The pot of Earl Grey tea also shows up. Here, it's this lovely, they're on their second pot of Earl Grey, sitting at their vintage cream color dining room, vigorously debating the La Boheme. And the first question she asks, they are asking themselves, her mother and this man, is it ill-advised to put a contemporary spin on a classic love story? That sets up the whole story. That's actually the question that she's asking all the way through this story. Okay. Oh, see this now, it could go on for weeks, but I will take it as I will do this as quickly as possible. I love this description of her mother. One sentence. My mother has an explosively successful career as a neuroscientist, and after we've fallen asleep, she closes her bedroom door with a slow and certain click and examines the quiet wounds that linger from her marriage. It says so much about that woman, so much about the state of the house, where Sophie is, where this scene is placed in the larger context of her mother without explaining anything. It's just this image of this really smart woman closing herself into her room and dealing with the wounds, the quiet wounds that linger from the marriage. I also appreciated the description of her father. This is her father. Well, actually, yeah, he retreated further into an unchecked clinical depression. And then he was somewhere we couldn't call him back from, and his silence shattered the walls. It's so powerful for being how understated. It's just also understated. And then her description. So she's got this description of her mother in one sentence here. We get a sense of her dad, a big piece of her dad in that little sentence there. And then she does this almost dad in also one sentence. Here at the bottom, he helps us rescue the positivity and particles of light that had slowly sunk to the bottom of our house under the roiling black-blue waves of my dad. Yeah, it's masterful writing. Okay, so there's another thing. She's got all these echoes. So I said the ivy comes back, the Earl Grey tea comes back, the music comes back. Also, just a simple sentence structure comes back. Here, the almost dad character, he drops me off at dance class, he picks me up. It's just these two simple sentences. Then on page 8, 7, 8, now we're at a very different stage of life. Her mother now has been diagnosed with cancer. She's in treatment. And now Sophie is doing the driving. And we have this same rhythm. I drop her off at radiation. I pick her up. And it's this little echo, that style, that rhythm, that clatter of sentences. But now it meant something here. It was light and bouncy here. And here it has a very, very different effect. Okay. I'm almost done. There are just a few little, wait, I want to just go back to page 4. I love this little thing. Okay, this is her mother. I hear my mom hastily papering over her discomfort. She works hard at offering an open, airy interest, but she's fiddling with the tag on her tea bag, lost in a strange and tiny origami, pausing, trying then to undo it, smooth it out, go back, and uncomplicate the suddenly complicated thing. Oh, I mean, I wish I'd written that. It's this little, I mean, that's again what Laurie was talking about. It is it's the showing, not telling, like what a person is doing with this tiny little tea bag, this strange and tiny origami. She's trying to fold up her life and pull it apart. You know, it just, it says so much without needing to say anything. Okay, maybe I'll just do one last thing. Oh, I mean, every 2 paragraphs, I have love this, love this, love this. Oh yeah, I think you just have to read it. I don't know that. I mean, I think maybe the only last thing I'll say is page 7. Here's an example of something of she's taken this ordinary moment and made it just transcendent. So on a bright spring day, I'm just going to read these 3 paragraphs, and I think it'll give you a taste of the depth of this story, the brilliance of it. On a bright spring day, my mom is diagnosed with cancer. I am 32. The phone call tears the mountains down. The disease is spreading, insistent, slow, and black Earl Grey tea spilled across our vintage cream-colored dining room table. The 3 of us sit around that table late into the night, a table so familiar I could pick it out of a landfill if I were sitting on a star. It has legs, arms, a personality, secrets. We've always sat around that table discussing what to do. When it was money, divorce, an argument. We solved problems at that table. We talked things into the ether until they didn't hurt us anymore. In the aftermath of her diagnosis, we are determined that this will be just like those. Yeah, I just could go on and on.
I know, it's so beautiful. I actually talked or noticed a lot of the things that you did, and also her brilliant use of metaphor. There's so many. The relationship is a maddening Rorschach test.
Oh yeah.
Remember
Yeah.
that part? And then this, oh my God, it's gut-wrenching. I'm now wandering through my 20s, and the search for my soulmate is such endless, gorgeous torture. What if it's him? What if it's not him? So she's talking about her own life now, and she's in her 20s. And then after the almost dad has left, hasn't come back because he's actually married, it hasn't occurred to me that there's something infinitely more searing than love that is or isn't. Love that in another life might have been. Oh my God. So the life that might have been but wasn't, the road not taken, we can all relate to that in some way. There's just such universal resonance to that. She's reached deep down and pulled out this universal, excruciating truth about life and our choices. And here she is holding it out for us to look at, because we all have those, oh, what if I had done that instead? What if I had been with that guy after all, or had lived in that town after all, or lived in France, that, made this decision, and
Yeah.
I took this road instead. And oh my gosh, it's masterful. There's so many small, exquisite details that she attended to. It's so beautiful. Oh, but Allison, we should say that this is kind of an outlier. We don't want to um intimidate people with how beautiful this story is, right?
Right. I mean, okay. Yes. Thank you, Laurie, because we're all different writers. I mean, well, the thing to do is to read Kathy's story, The Road Elsewhere, which is a completely different style. And is this, as Lorna said, it is this heart-rich story. It is the warmth that radiates through that story. It's just this story that is permeated with love and a very universal story as well. I mean, it's very similar in theme to the parking lot, that story we mentioned before. And you had likened
Oh,
it.
Alice Munro, The Moons of Jupiter is also about a middle-aged woman dealing with her father being old and dying.
Yeah. So there's this beautiful universality to that story as well, but the writing style could not be more different. And this, I think, it makes for a really beautiful exercise to read both side by side and see these. These are completely different styles, and in one person, any judge is going to slightly judge the stories on the short list differently. And that is just the way of art. It's the way of writing. It's the way of life. Okay, did you find where it is? Okay, someone just posted it. Yeah, I posted the link to both stories, but I'll do it again because I think sometimes the chat goes roaring by and you can't see it. Oh, whoops.
Oh,
Wait.
this is interesting. Someone said, interestingly, she covers a lot of time in this story, which is unlike what we learn about in memoir. So that's true, but it's still about one thing. It still has the container.
Yeah, no, the container. Oh, that's great, Laurie. Yeah, because the container is the almost dad. The almost dad is this. So he's this figure. I mean, just to explain it to people who haven't read it, he's this figure who comes into her life, her mom's life, when she's a teenager, and they have this incredible. There's all this, there's real zhuzh in the relationship. But he's married, and they're not having an affair. They're having a really profound friendship and connection. But and Sophie's trying to figure out, what is this? Like, she's trying to name it and cast it in some understandable light, which she can't really as a teenager. And then she revisits it when she's in her 20s, and as Laurie said, she's trying to find her own. Is this my guy? Is that the soulmate? This, whatever she called it, that beautiful agony, however she said it. And then we revisit the story again when her mother is dying of cancer, because this man comes back into their life then. So he is the container, but we see it's like a triptych in a way. We see the relationship here in time, and here in time. And the arc is her very different understanding of that relationship in each of those moments. And the last line is just, what she eventually makes of it is worth. Yeah, it's a story that, I mean, the landing works. And that's one thing, the last thing I'll say, because we're really over time now. The last thing I'll say is, one of the things that Lorna said in the interview that I didn't include was that for her, many of the stories that made it to the long list that didn't make it to the short list, she said they were wonderful stories, and then they just kind of ended. And or they just sort of dropped off a cliff, or they tried to tie everything up in a very neat bow at the end. She said so often it was the ending that made the difference between a story that, was fully formed and one that was partially formed, really good and really promising, but just not quite there yet. And so it's worth paying attention to endings, but not to try to summarize it all. And, and then like trying to tie it up in a bow can be as disastrous as just sort of the sentence ending and not really going anywhere. And interestingly, I interviewed Kathy, and that interview got sent out today on my in my newsletter. And she talked about, she didn't have an ending until just before the deadline. She thought, how am I going to end this? And she had tried. Yeah, she talked about the last minute ending. So, but just paying attention to the ending, that it can't be the last thing you do. It really can't be an afterthought. It is as important as the first sentence is the last. It's as important as the beginning. So just to pay attention to that. Would you agree?
Definitely. Definitely.
Okay. Okay, well, thank you so much, Laurie, for doing this. Thank you for for all the work you do with people. I can post that link. Well, I'll send it out with the recording, how you can find Laurie if that's of interest. I'll send the Readsy link as well, and the submission link. Okay. Oh, you're so welcome. I hope you found it helpful. We've managed to get to all the questions. There were a lot, though. I'm sorry if we didn't manage to get to yours, but I tried to just pick out the ones that were in some ways the most universal, the ones that would apply to most people. Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Laurie, for all your insights and tips. And
Sure, that was fun.
okay, yeah, it's always fun
Yeah.
to talk to you. Thanks so much. Okay, take care, everyone. And I hope you'll take a chance and send us your story. You can find all the information at amyaward.com about the contest. Okay, thanks so much. Bye.
Bye.